Welcome to the deep dive. I'm really so glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, it's a great topic we have lined up.
Because if you have ever, looked at the news cycle and wondered why certain political scandals seem to drop at the most suspiciously perfect moments, today's topic is really the skeleton key.
It absolutely is.
I mean, you see it all the time, right? A politician announces a major investigation into corruption, and then completely out of the blue, like 3 days later, a devastating video or a massive financial leak just destroys their career.
Right.
And we're often conditioned to think, wow, what a bizarre coincidence.
But when you start looking at the actual mechanics of political leverage, you quickly realize that coincidence in that arena is incredibly rare.
Yeah, almost non-existent.
Exactly. We're looking at a landscape that is highly engineered. It's the strategic deployment of manufactured crises, where the timing is just as weaponized as the information itself.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking a really detailed Wikipedia article on a concept known as Compromat.
Yes, Compromat.
And we are going to explore how this dark art evolved from like 1930s secret police jargon into this massive modern global tool of digital extortion and political leverage.
Right, so to give you a clear initial overview of what we're dealing with here, the word compromat is a Russian portmanteau.
Meaning it's two words smashed together.
Exactly. It combines two words to mean compromising material.
Right.
And in the English-speaking world, you might hear PR executives or intelligence analysts refer to it as dark PR or black PR.
Dark PR, yeah.
But fundamentally, it's damaging information about a public figure. So whether that's a politician, a business person, or a journalist, that is systematically used to discredit them, blackmail them, or exert this immense ongoing pressure over their decisions.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get into the really scandalous historical operations, which are wild, you really need to understand the fundamental DNA of Compromat.
Yeah, you do.
Because it is not just, a standard issue smear campaign.
Oh, far from it. I mean, a typical smear campaign is usually just a tactical strike, right? You want to make someone look bad in the immediate moment to, I don't know, win a news cycle. But Compromat has a much deeper history and a fundamentally different psychological objective.
Right.
If we trace the etymology, the word itself actually originates in the 1930s as internal slang for the Stalin-era NKVD.
Which was the precursor to the KGB, right?
Exactly, the Soviet secret police.
And what I found so fascinating in the source material is that the Merriam-Webster dictionary notes this word didn't even make its first known appearance in the English language until 1990.
Wow, 1990.
Yeah, so you have this highly specialized, completely isolated concept that spent decades being perfected behind the Iron Curtain before the West even had a name for it.
And that isolation really allowed the methodology to become an institution. And a key part of that methodology is understanding that the material itself, it doesn't actually have to be an objective, hidden truth.
Yes, that is the part that really shifts your perspective.
Yeah, it really does.
Because I always assumed, compromat meant digging up a dark hidden reality about someone.
Sure, like a real secret.
Right. But according to the source, it can be entirely factual, it can be completely fabricated from thin air, or, and this seems to be the most insidious version, it can be a deceptive mix of both.
Yeah, that mix is dangerous.
You take a completely innocent photograph, or like a mundane financial transaction, and you present it wildly out of context to construct a completely nefarious narrative.
Because the truth value of the material is almost secondary to its destructive value. The goal is the leverage.
Right.
And what makes Compromat so unique in the political culture of Russia and other post-Soviet states is the sheer volume of it that is collected, and honestly, how indiscriminately it's gathered.
I love the analogy of a hoarder's insurance file for this.
It's very accurate.
Because I always pictured a spy, right? Identifying a specific target like a rogue general and then actively going out to dig up dirt on that one specific guy.
Like in the movies.
Exactly. But the source indicates it's actually much broader than that. The operatives gathering this material often don't even have a specific target in mind when they start.
No, they don't.
They just gather information on everyone. Allies, enemies, neutral, bureaucrats. They just stack it up in a massive vault.
Just sweeping it all up.
Yeah, sweeping up every piece of behavioral data, knowing that eventually, someday it might be useful leverage down the road.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is really helpful to contrast Compromat with what we call opposition research in the United States or the UK.
Right, oppo research.
Yeah. In Western politics, campaigns spend millions on opposition research to find compromising material on their opponents. But the goal there is almost always binary and destructive.
Meaning you just want to take them out.
Exactly. You release the information to weaken the opponent so you can win an election.
Right. It's highly transactional. You drop the file, you win the race, the opponent goes home in disgrace.
But Compromat flips that entirely. It is an investment strategy uniquely designed for ongoing control and influence.
So you don't drop the file.
Right. You actually do not want to destroy the person. You want them to stay in power, but you want to own them.
Ah, I see.
It's about behavioral blackmail. You hold that file over a politician or a business leader's head to ensure they vote a certain way, or maybe award a lucrative state contract to the right company.
Or quietly drop a pesky investigation.
Exactly, because the moment you actually publish the compromat, you lose the leverage.
Which brings us to the actual messy physical reality of how this was gathered in the 20th century.
Oh, yeah. The old school methods.
I was reading through the sources and thinking, wait, so how are they actually getting this stuff? Are we really talking about classic spy movie tropes here? The hidden cameras and planted evidence?
Pretty much, yeah.
Because I've got two specific cases from the 1950s that read exactly like a John le Carré novel.
Let's hear them.
There's a British civil servant named John Vassall and an American journalist named Joseph Alsop.
Both very famous cases.
Yeah, both of them were stationed in Moscow during the Cold War.
Yeah.
And both fell victim to classic KGB honey traps.
Right, and the honey trap is perhaps the most enduring physical entrapment technique in the espionage playbook.
It's iconic, really.
It is. The KGB would employ operatives, often sex workers, working with the state, to seduce foreign targets in Moscow hotel rooms. And while that was happening, operatives filmed the encounters through two-way mirrors or with hidden cameras.
Just incredibly invasive.
And the reason the Vassall and Alsop cases are so historically significant is because they're both gay honey traps.
And to really understand the mechanics of why that was so devastating, you have to look at the legal and social context of the 1950s.
Right, the environment back then.
Homosexuality was strictly illegal in Britain at the time, and a massive, massive social taboo in the U.S.
Absolutely.
So the KGB wasn't just capturing an embarrassing indiscretion. They were capturing an act that, if mailed back to London or Washington, would lead to complete societal ruin, loss of career, and actual criminal prosecution.
So the leverage was absolute. The target was forced to choose between committing treason by passing secrets to the Soviets or facing total destruction at home.
What a nightmare.
It really was. But what is truly fascinating about the evolution of Compromat is what happens when the Cold War ends.
Right, the shift in the 90s.
Yeah, moving into the 1990s and 2000s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, you had thousands of highly trained intelligence officers suddenly operating in a fractured state.
Looking for work, basically.
Exactly. So the tactics turned inward. Compromat wasn't just for foreign spies anymore. It became the standard operating procedure for internal Russian politics and business rivalries.
And you see that shift perfectly in the 1997 case of Valentin Kovalyov.
Oh, the Kovalyov case.
Yeah, he was the sitting Russian Minister of Justice.
The Minister of Justice.
Right. And he was completely ousted after a newspaper published photographs of him in a sauna with prostitutes.
But the kicker here.
Yeah, the kicker. And I have to say, you really have to admire the sheer entrepreneurial audacity of the Russian underworld here.
It's wild.
It wasn't just any sauna. It was a facility entirely controlled by the Solntsevskaya Bratva.
Which was one of the biggest crime syndicates in the country.
Exactly. It's the ultimate synthesis of organized crime and political warfare.
Yeah, the visual of the Minister of Justice compromising himself in a mob-controlled facility, it completely obliterates any authority he has to uphold the law.
It's checkmate.
It is, and it highlights how Compromat transitioned from a state intelligence tool to an oligarchy and mafia tool.
And we also see the weaponization of timing that we talked about at the top of the show.
Right, the suspicious timing.
Because in 1999, Yuri Skuratov, who was the Prosecutor General of Russia, started investigating the sitting president, Boris Yeltsin, and his close associates for corruption.
A very dangerous investigation to launch.
Very. And the investigation was actually gaining steam. And then, as if by magic, a grainy video airs on national television showing a man resembling Skuratov in bed with two women.
And just like that, it's over.
Yep, he is instantly suspended and later dismissed. The investigation into Yeltsin just evaporates.
The causality is undeniable there. It's a direct surgical retaliatory strike. And the practitioners of Compromat are absolute masters of maximizing psychological damage through that timing. Look at the 2010 case involving a comedian and opposition figure named Viktor Shendorovich.
Oh, this one is brutal.
It is. He was caught in a Kremlin honey trap video, but the people holding the Compromat, they didn't just release it on a random Tuesday.
No.
They waited. They held on to that footage and released it exactly 2 days before his daughter's wedding.
2 days. I mean, it is explicitly designed to inflict maximum personal and familial pain.
It sends a message.
Yeah, a message to every other opposition figure. Like, we won't just ruin your career, we will humiliate your family on the most important days of their lives.
It's terrifying.
It is. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because relying on physical honey traps, saunas, and hotel rooms, that requires immense manpower.
And physical locations.
Right, and it carries a really high risk of the operatives getting caught. So to scale this operation globally in the 21st century, they had to digitize.
They did.
The physical entrapment of the 20th century gives way to the cybercrime and digital framing of the modern era.
And this is where the definition of compromat expands into something far more terrifying. We mentioned earlier that compromat doesn't actually have to be true.
Right, the fabricated stuff.
Yeah. In the digital age, state actors and cybercriminals realized they could entirely bypass the messy human element of a honey trap.
Us.
Well, instead of tricking a target into doing something compromising, they simply use malware to plant illegal material directly onto a target's personal computer to discredit them.
Which brings us to the incredibly disturbing case of Vladimir Bukovsky.
Yes.
He was a very vocal, longtime critic of Soviet and Russian leaders who had been living in exile in the UK. And in 2015, the UK's Crown Prosecution Service announced they were prosecuting him.
Right.
Because they found prohibited images, specifically child pornography, on his computer.
But the trial was halted. Investigators actually had to pause the entire prosecution to bring in cybersecurity experts. They needed to determine if Russian operatives had used sophisticated malware things, like remote access Trojans, or RATs, to remotely access his hard drive.
So they could digitally plant those images without him ever knowing.
Exactly.
Just to pause on the mechanics of that for a second, because it is crucial. A remote access Trojan basically acts like a digital skeleton key.
It does.
If you click the wrong link in an email, or even if your software is just out of date, an operative hundreds of miles away can quietly open a backdoor into your laptop, drop files into hidden folders, and then just close the door behind them.
And Bukovsky maintained his innocence from day one. But he tragically died in October of 2019 before the investigation into the planted evidence was fully resolved.
It bypasses human agency entirely. You don't have to make a mistake. The mistake is forcefully uploaded to your life.
It's chilling. And this digital evolution is also how Compromat started deeply infiltrating Western politics.
Now, before we dive into these next examples regarding Western politics, I want to step out for a second and say something directly to you listening.
Yeah, this is an important point.
It is, because the sources we are analyzing here mention some highly charged, very recent political figures in the U.S. and the U.K.
Right.
And our mission on this deep dive is strictly to look at these sources impartially. We are not endorsing any political viewpoints, left-wing or right-wing.
Absolutely not.
We are simply neutrally conveying the allegations in the historical record exactly as they are reported in the original source material, so we can understand the global expansion of this tactic.
And that is an important boundary to set, because the source material illustrates that the fear of compromat is no longer just a post-Soviet problem. It is a recognized daily factor in Western intelligence.
Right.
For instance, during the 2016 U.S. presidential election, U.S. intelligence agencies investigated potentially compromising personal and financial information regarding Donald Trump.
The Steele dossier.
Yes, this was largely based on opposition research known as the Steele dossier, and it led to high-level intelligence briefings regarding allegations that he or his administration could be vulnerable to manipulation by the Russian government.
And the source also details the situation with Michael Flynn, who was the incoming U.S. National Security Advisor in 2016.
Right.
He allegedly lied to the White House about the extent of his phone calls with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. And what's fascinating about the mechanics of this case is how the lie itself became the compromat.
Exactly.
According to testimony from former acting U.S. Attorney General Sally Yates, the Department of Justice believed that this lie placed Flynn in a highly compromised situation.
Yes. The psychology of the Flynn situation is a textbook compromat vulnerability.
How so?
Well, if the Russians knew the actual content of the phone calls and they knew Flynn had lied to his own government about them, they suddenly held leverage over the U.S. National Security Advisor.
I see.
They could theoretically say, Do what we want, or we will reveal that you lied to your president. The vulnerability itself becomes the compromising material.
Wow. And we see this crossing the Atlantic as well.
Mm-hmm.
In the UK, Chris Bryant, a Labour Party member of Parliament and ex-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Russia, publicly claimed the Russian government orchestrated a homophobic campaign to remove him from his position.
Right, targeting MPs.
Furthermore, he claimed that the Kremlin had actively acquired Compromat on high-profile Conservative Party MPs, specifically naming prominent figures like Boris Johnson, Liam Fox, Alan Duncan, and David Davis.
It really has become a standard tool of geopolitical statecraft. But what might be even more impactful for everyday people is how these tactics trickled down from state-sponsored espionage into the private sector.
Right, the commercialization of it.
Exactly. After the Soviet Union collapsed, you had a lot of people who knew how to gather and weaponize information, realizing there was a lot of money to be made in corporate warfare. Compromat was commercialized into an everyday digital shakedown.
I was reading this section of the source and thinking, wait, so has this trickled down to the business world? Like, how does an average executive end up dealing with KGB-style tactics?
Well, you can trace this commercialization back to a few key pioneers on the early internet.
Sure.
In 1999, a man named Sergei Gorshkov created a blog called Compromat.ru.
He essentially put the business model right on the tin.
He really did. It was a site dedicated entirely to scandals involving Russian politicians and oligarchs. And Gorshkov would proactively post legitimate news links to build an audience.
To make it look real.
Right. But the real business was that he would accept direct cash payments in exchange for posting unverified, highly scandalous dirt on specific people.
Wow.
It was incredibly controversial, but it proved that there was a lucrative market for bespoke smearing. And then a few years later, in 2005, a human rights activist named Vladimir Pribilovsky created anticompromat.org.
Anti-Compromat account.
Yeah, which compiled opposition politics and information, further showing how the model could be adapted for different angles.
But the jump from early 2000s blogging to what is happening right now is staggering.
It's a totally different ballgame today.
The source describes this massive modern ecosystem of anonymous fake news websites that operate as a sophisticated SEO extortion racket.
Yes, SEO extortion.
They use URLs loaded with keywords like compromat, roast crime, or anti-core, which is short for anti-corruption. And they use advanced search engine optimization to completely hijack a target's name on the web.
To understand how they do this, you have to look at the mechanics of SEO. These extortionists use techniques like keyword stuffing and backlink farming.
Like creating fake traffic.
Exactly. They create hundreds of dummy sites that all link back to their main smear article. Google's algorithm sees all this traffic and interconnected linking, assumes the article is highly relevant and authoritative, and pushes it to the very top of the search results.
That's crazy.
So if you Google a specific mid-level business executive in Eastern Europe, the first page of results isn't their LinkedIn profile. It's flooded with articles from these anonymous sites calling them an embezzler or a fraud.
What's fascinating here is the sheer audacity of their business model. It is a closed-loop, double-dipping extortion scheme.
Double-dipping. Incredibly.
First, these anonymous websites secretly take payments from someone's competitors, whether in business or local politics, to publish the negative information.
Right.
And again, this information might be true, it might be entirely false, or it might be a deceptive mix.
That's step one, get paid to launch the smear. Step two is where the real extortion happens.
The shakedown.
Yep. Once those articles are dominating the target's search results, ruining their business deals and personal reputation, the target inevitably contacts the site demanding they take the defamatory articles down.
Because what else are they going to do?
Right. And then the website demands a massive blackmail payment, often in cryptocurrency, from the victim to remove the very articles they were already paid by the competitor to post.
It's brilliant in the darkest way possible. And to make it all look convincing to a casual observer, these sites don't just post the fake dirt, they build a veneer of absolute legitimacy.
They do.
They publish brief, factual articles based on real news agency reports interspersed with the smears. They either invent fake journalist names with AI-generated headshots, or they literally copy the names of real, respected journalists.
So if you just glance at the site, or if an investor does a quick background check, it looks like a legitimate investigative journalism portal.
It exploits our modern reliance on search engines as arbiters of truth.
It really does.
We're conditioned to believe that if the first 5 links on Google say someone is a criminal, there must be fire behind that smoke.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? When you take a step back and look at this entire historical arc, from the physical KGB honey traps in 1950s hotel rooms, to remotely planting digital evidence via malware, to these modern SEO shakedown sites, you realize something. Compromat, at its core, is a highly specialized form of disinformation. Its primary product isn't actually a specific truth or even a specific lie. Its primary product is confusion.
That is the ultimate takeaway of the source material. The overarching goal, especially when these tactics are deployed by state actors and amplified by the media, is to reduce public trust in institutions altogether.
Just break down trust completely.
Yes. If the public is constantly bombarded with scandals, both real and fake, they eventually experience total cognitive exhaustion.
They just tune out.
They stop trying to figure out what is true. They simply throw their hands up and assume everyone is corrupt, everyone is dirty, and objective truth no longer exists.
Which leaves you with a really provocative, almost unsettling thought to ponder as we wrap up today.
Definitely.
In a world where fake compromat, planted digital evidence, and AI-generated scandals are becoming so incredibly common and easy to manufacture, what happens to actual accountability?
That is the big question.
Because does the mere existence of fake compromat create a perfect, impenetrable shield for truly guilty people?
Think about it.
If you are a corrupt politician or a fraudulent CEO and you get caught in a real, undeniable scandal, all you have to do now is wave your hands at the press and say, it's fake. I was set up. It's just compromat. Right? And because the public knows that fake compromat exists, a huge portion of them will actually believe you.
It is the ultimate paradox of the information age. The muddy waters don't just destroy the innocent, they provide the perfect, ready-made camouflage for the guilty.
You aren't just looking at a muddy picture anymore. You are looking at a system deliberately designed to make you doubt your own eyes.
Truly.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning what you read, keep looking for the mechanics behind the news, and we will catch you next time.